Welcome to an overview of the National Traffic System, presented by Fred, K3CSX.
It's probably one of those things that a lot of new hams probably never heard of, because I know sometimes I'll get radiogram messages for new hams in the area, and you call them and you explain, how you got this message, and so they don't usually hear about that when they're learning about the hobby. But it's actually something that's been around for a long time. So these are sort of like the things that I thought we'd talk about. First, what exactly is traffic? And I don't know. I mean, ever since I got involved doing this back in the 70s after I got my license, it was always called traffic, and I never really understood why. And I did a Google search, and I can't really find why is the stuff that hams do called traffic. But I found some stuff. And then, of course, the other part is,
I think it comes from the term message traffic.
Yeah, there's actually, I was going to show how that got derived. Also just kind of talk about what is a net, and of course we'll talk about nets in general a little bit, and then specifically about traffic nets. And the reason why traffic nets exist, a little bit about where this actually came from, and then how the National Traffic System is organized. So kind of get a sense for how does messages and traffic flow through the National Traffic System. A little bit about how a traffic net would operate if you were to listen in on one. And why should you even get involved in the National Traffic System and be participating in this. And then some myths about this, and also some additional information about traffic nets in the area and where you can get more information. So, what is traffic? So I kind of, looked up some definitions of traffic. And actually the first one, communications between groups, okay, messages or communications. And then sort of a general concept, which, at the time, they said it's like the movement of something, and they give the example like, ships, vehicles, planes, through some sort of an area or network by some kind of routing. And I thought, okay, that's actually pretty good. So you can just say messages are the same thing. And then just, I think this last one about the traffic refers to information or signals sent over a communication system probably came along a little bit later. And actually, I found the word traffic actually came from, I believe it was actually going all the way back to Latin. It was like trans meanings across, and facari, which means something about to move something into a different area. So it may have gone all the way back to the Romans. Okay, so what's traffic? Around here, this is when most people hear about traffic, that's the first thing that people think of. And of course, it follows that same concept, right? There's vehicles, they're trying to follow along a route to get to their destination. Fortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen. So when we're talking about traffic in the National Traffic System, is basically a radiogram. And it's the amateur radio equivalent of a telegram. In fact, as far as I know, all the way back to the beginning, the amateur radiogram form has always been yellow, which I think was also the case with Western Union telegram forms. So of course, telegraph and the Western Union system really started back, somewhere in the 1800s. Of course, at that time it was like a landline kind of thing. It was actually pretty common that, copper wire was strung along, railroad tracks as they went across the country, and periodically along the way where they have stations, they usually had a telegraph operator there that would, pass messages on. Initially, the whole thing was done for the benefit of the railroad, but then, somebody came up with the idea, it's like, well, what if somebody wants to send a message to a relative back east in New York? Well, if we're not really busy, we can go ahead and do that and for a fee. So this is what we're talking about when we're referring to traffic. And then the other thing, of course, is like, what's a net? Now, most hams, are aware of like our Sunday night net. So there's kind of two different ways you can think of nets. There's a more formal net, which usually means there's a net control station that sort of directs it. And that would be like, a public service net for a Marine Corps marathon or a running event, or maybe, an emergency type thing. Also, certainly traffic nets are directed nets with a net control station. And then there's sort of like the in-between thing, like the Mark Sunday night net really officially would be a net because there's a host which sort of like, keeps track of who joined the net, who wants to make a comment, who's already given their comment. So it's still a similar kind of a thing. And then there's informal nets. So that would be the kind of thing you just hear every once in a while. Somebody, gets on the repeater and says, yeah, I'm having trouble getting into the repeater, and I'm, such and such. And then somebody suggests, well, what kind of antenna do you have? What kind of equipment do you have? And so they just kind of like get in this informal discussion, and maybe a third person comes along and has their ideas to put in. So after a while, you may have 3 or 4 people. Generally, you may be following a rotation, but sometimes somebody follows up and it's not in the same rotation, but that's fine. There's some order to it. People usually aren't talking one on top of the other. So that would be like an informal net. And usually the nets have a specific purpose, like our Sunday night net, or for training purposes, things like that. And I think I already talked about the difference between formal and informal nets. And obviously we're interested now in traffic nets, but as I mentioned, there's public service nets. There's DX nets, so if you're interested in getting DX contacts, your chances of getting somebody from a specific country just at random listening around might be a little hard, but sometimes there's these DX nets where stations will check into them, and that gives you their opportunity to specifically make a contact with somebody from, Hawaii or a Pacific island or something like that. I don't personally know about any DX nets around this area. So why traffic nets exist? Well, basically, as you probably learned when you were getting your license, that Part 97 of the Communications Act talks about amateur radio, and one of the first things they mention is the basis and purpose of why amateur radio exists. And one of the reasons is to provide emergency communications. And so around here, this isn't quite as much a thing, but people who have been, like in the area of Katrina or out in some of the Pacific Islands where a typhoon rolls through, after this goes through and the regular communications are out, this may actually be one of the only ways that they can get information to the outside world is through amateur radio operators. And I think the same thing's been true, I think in Haiti with the earthquake and some other things like that. So it still is applicable. And so, part of being able to provide this communications means you have to train for it, because you really need to understand what you're doing and practice that on an ongoing basis, so that when the time comes, you won't really, have a hard time getting into it. And the other thing too, most of the messages that go through the national traffic system are messages to other hams, but you can have messages to third parties, meaning people who are not amateur radio operators. And it's not unusual, especially during the holidays, to have people who are hams send messages to friends in faraway places who aren't hams. So calling those people up and giving them a holiday greetings is some kind of pretty neat. So the idea for the national traffic system actually started back in 1914. And most people know that, Hiram Percy Maxim W1AW was sort of the founder of the amateur radio relay, American Radio Relay League. And actually what happened was he was located in Hartford, Connecticut. He wanted to contact another ham, I think it was somewhere farther down in New York or New Jersey, but he couldn't contact him directly. But he found there was another station that was a little farther north in New York, closer to Connecticut, that he could contact. And he asked him if he would try to contact the other ham and relay a message for him. And so, that was basically his idea of, having a system of relaying messages from station to station. And in fact, that's why the name of the organization is the American Radio Relay League. It was all his idea, primarily focused originally on relaying messages. Now, what we know today as the national traffic system was really sort of come up with by George Hart, who was an ARL member and was a member of the headquarters staff for many years. He's a silent key now. He died in 2003, so not that long ago. So he came up with the structure of the national traffic system, because it was like all well and good, you know, the old man, W1AW, you know, he would contact somebody, but if you wanted to send a message somewhere, how are you actually going to get it, make sure that there was somebody on the receiving end at a particular time? So he came up with this idea of having an actual organization to a national traffic system, having a certain kind of scheduling of when they meet several times a day. They call them cycles. And the idea was that would allow for the messages to flow up into the system to be dispersed out, and then any messages coming into an area would sort of flow back down through the system. And the national traffic system is sort of a hierarchy, and we'll kind of show you that in a minute. Now, so you have nets at different levels. So we have like local nets around here, the ones that people might be able to get into, and these happen to be on 2 meters on repeaters, are the Baltimore traffic net and the Northern Virginia traffic net. And so those are opportunities to actually participate in the net, and you know, you can do it with 2 meters if you have a reasonably good antenna. Especially the NBTN, the Bluemont repeater that they use has awesome coverage. I mean, it's got coverage down into southern Maryland, out into West Virginia, Pennsylvania, you know, lots of Virginia, and so it's also got a large coverage area. And then at the next level up, you have your section nets. So remember, like, we're in the ARL MDC section, Maryland and DC section. And so there are several nets that operate at the section level, and the Maryland Emergency Phone Net, which is on HF, it's sideband, so you would have to have at least a general license to participate in that. The Maryland, the MDD net is a CW net. And so it operates primarily CW, usually pretty fast around, most of the people are pretty well experienced. There's 20 words a minute. So again, something you do on HF. Usually I think they're mostly on 75, 80 meters. And then there's also one I forgot to mention in there that's called the Maryland Slow Net, which is also a CW net, but the idea is it's to train you how to send messages using CW. And they'll go as slow as you want. If it's like, you know, 1 word a minute, that's fine. And what they'll do is, you know, when you join in, they pair you up with an individual instructor, and they have a whole series of messages that are basically in the format of radiogram messages, and each one, you know, in 25 words or less, talks about some aspect of how to handle messages. So if you are interested in either, you know, learning how to do the traffic nets using high-speed CW, or you're just interested in becoming a better CW operator, even if you're never going to use it for traffic nets, the Maryland Slow Net, or MSN, is really a good way to do that. The VSBN is the Virginia sideband net, so that's kind of like the Virginia equivalent of the Maryland Emergency Phone Net. Then going up, you have region net. So region, we're in region 3, right? Everybody from this area that gets the new license has a 3 in their call sign. There's 10 regions around the country, so the NTS divided up and said that each of these regions will also have a net at the region level that handles everything below it. And then they divided the country up into 3 areas: Eastern, Central, and Pacific, which basically correspond to the time zone. So the Eastern area is everything in the Eastern time zone, Central area is everything in the Central time zone, and Pacific area is everything in Mountain and Pacific time zone. And then, so you kind of now have everything sort of fed up so that your messages are finally now at some level where you kind of have 3 different areas. But what if somebody in one part of the country needs their message from California to get over to, say, Maryland? There's got to be some way to bridge the nets. And that's something called the Transcontinental Core. And those guys usually are like, you know, 45 word a minute CW guys. Like, there's a guy, Pat, KK3F, lives out in Frostburg, used to live over here in Hyattsville. And he's blind, and he's one of these guys that, you know, does CW at some incredible rate. He, you know, copies the stuff on his brailer. He's really amazing. And if you ever look in QST, somewhere in there, there's a section about, you know, they call it the Public Service Honor Roll. And I'll kind of mention that a little bit later on, but they have this thing called the Brass Pounders League, and I mean, he's like incredible when it comes to the amount of traffic that he moves around. And then there's sort of a digital thing, which is a little bit newer, using WinLink 2K, and that's also, again, sometimes the transcontinental folks, or even if it doesn't get in that area, they may send messages back and forth at lower levels using the digital networks.
So the D stands for digital. And
NTSD, yeah, the National Traffic System Digital.
WL2K.
Yeah, well, actually, it's actually the National Traffic System Digital can use different methods. I mean, they might use straight PACTOR, WinMore, you know, WinLink 2000. So, like, two stations who are NTSD nodes may not actually use WinLink 2000. They have another way of just using packet to send stuff back and forth.
Those are the net designators, right?
Right.
Somebody's checking in the WL2K. I see.
Right.
All right. They're not involved.
And I wasn't really going to get into the actual format of messages. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the radiogram format, because that's the one you're most likely to hear on any of these nets we talked about. For the digital system, they kind of have a way of batching these together, and they have specific header strings that tell it how to route it, and you know, and then once it gets routed to a particular state, they use the area code to then route it to a specific area, and then somebody in that area who's a member of does the digital will sign into the digital server and pull down any messages for their area. So this is from the Maryland DC website, ARL-MDC.net. And it's kind of a little bit confusing. So what I did was I tried to make a simpler version. I mean, again, this talks about the nets in this area, and you can see that they sort of talk about, for example, down here is the Baltimore Traffic Net, which is the local net, and they have liaisons from the Maryland Emergency Phone Net and MDD, and sometimes also MSN, but usually they're connected through MDD. So traffic that goes outbound, so if I go to the Baltimore Traffic Net and I have a message to send, it sort of goes out through probably MDD usually. And then they may have somebody who goes to the third region net, who goes to the Eastern Area Net, and then the Eastern Area Net can talk to other nets through the transcontinental port. So I tried to make a simplified version that basically is like this. So if I go to the Baltimore Traffic Net, somebody will check in from MEPN. Usually that's how messages come into that net, is through the Maryland Emergency Phone Net. The reason is because that meets earlier, I think it's about a half hour earlier than the Baltimore Traffic Net. So what will happen is traffic flows down the system this way, and it gets to the Baltimore Traffic Net. So for example, it may come in from an Eastern Area Net through third region. Maybe it might be somebody checks in from MEPN directly to third region, or there may be MDD involved. Usually that's going in the other direction. So let's say somebody had there's a ham up in Massachusetts who usually sends radiogram messages to new hams welcoming to the hobby. I don't know, has any of you people who've gotten your license, say, within the last 2 or 3 months actually gotten one of these messages? Did you get one, Mark?
Yeah, from out in California somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, there's from Kate.
I think that was probably out.
Yeah, there's a ham, Kate, out in California. There's a guy, Lauren, who's up in Massachusetts. So they basically just keep an eye on people getting new licenses, and they either send them something, welcome to the hobby, or sometimes they even send them to people who've been around for a while saying, you know, get involved in the national traffic system and all this kind of stuff. And the reason they do it, by the way, is because if we were only going to handle traffic when there's a real emergency, or the greetings, you know, birthday wishes to grandmother and holiday wishes, there would just never be enough stuff, you know, to keep people in practice. People just would fit, you know, after a while, everybody would check in, there wasn't being anything going on, so people would lose interest. So basically, these folks generate the amateur radio equivalent of spam, but it's really just, you know, messages to keep the system going. And then a lot of them ask for a return reply, so that generates, you know, another piece of traffic that can get a chance to move back through the system.
They keep the system well-oiled and in working order.
Right. I mean, that's exactly what it is. I mean, if you don't use the system, it's going to get stagnant, it's going to rust, and then you might not be able to get started again.
So, for those arrows, and so someone...
Directions, I just couldn't figure out how to get Visio to draw me a double-headed arrow. But so yeah, what happens is for any given net, there's liaisons. So for example, the Maryland emergency phone net, I think it says 6 p.m. Somebody will check into there, usually from the 3rd region, maybe from the MDD net. And also somebody from that net will be the liaison to the Baltimore traffic net that meets at 6:30. So the idea is that if there's any messages headed into the Baltimore area, then they'll come down through these nets. 3rd region meets earlier in the afternoon. Then through these nets, finally the Baltimore traffic net is 6:30. Then what they'll do is they'll ask for somebody, let's say, you know, there's a new message for, you know, Stuart, when you get, you know, you may be getting a new message, and they kind of say, okay, the closest local net to that area would probably be the Baltimore traffic net. Because actually that's, as far as I know, the only 2-meter local traffic net in, you know, Maryland. So they'll bring it to that net and they'll ask if, you know, they'll list the traffic and ask if somebody can take it. And then usually if I check in, I'll take anything from Montgomery County, DC, usually Prince George's County, and probably Anne Arundel County too. So then I'll take that and then I'll go ahead and deliver it. Same thing going the other way, just works in the opposite direction. I'll come to the net with a radiogram message, say, now I have a reply from Stuart back to Kate. So I'll bring the message to DTN, say I have through traffic, meaning going outside the area. The rep from MDD will then, who's checked into this net, usually both people here are checked in, they're bringing, this person's taking. So the person from MDD then will take the message that I have, and then they'll feed it up through the 3rd region to the eastern area. And then if it is headed to Kate out in California, somebody on the Transcontinental Corps will be checked into this area net. They'll pick the traffic up for the Pacific area and they'll send it over here. Somebody else will pick up stuff for the central area. And then it just gets kind of percolated back down the system.
Question.
Sure.
These various nets, they're on assigned frequencies at assigned times?
Yes. They have an they certainly have a regular time, and they usually have a specific frequency, but as the rules state, nobody has ownership of a frequency.
Right.
But there's usually a frequency where they're kind of, you can expect to hear them, and if that frequency is busy, you kind of tune up or a little bit tone down, and you usually find them in that general vicinity.
The Transcontinental Corps, they make their own schedule.
Right, they make their own schedule. Right. So they don't actually have a specific schedule. They basically come to whenever those other area nets meet, and then on their own, you know, depending on what, because, you know, somebody from the eastern area, somebody in the Pacific area, because of the time zone difference, they may want to contact them later in the night, you know, which is like, you know, after work in the Pacific area. Or a lot of these people probably that handle a lot of the traffic, though, that I know of, are probably retired too, so they have the time to check into these early day nets. So yeah, if you're retired and you got the time, go for it.
But I would presume, let's say I was in New York and I wanted to get a message to California, it would take all day.
Yeah, actually, usually it's going to take a couple of days.
A couple of days?
Yeah, I mean, like I've gotten...
Well, that's why I pick up the phone.
Well, again, you know, the idea for this practice, though, is where, you know, I mean, it started actually when a lot of people didn't have phones.
Well, right, I understand.
And, you know, there was no email, or, you know, or making long-distance calls to send a message, whatever. Yeah, you can put it on a postcard or stick it in an envelope, put a 2-cent stamp on it, and it'll get there. But there's actually a chance that amateur radio could get there across the country a little bit faster than first-class mail back in the, you know,
A lot of this developed during World War II to get messages back to the home front.
Right. Dave?
People in remote rural areas still use this. They rely on repeater systems rather than cell phones or landlines like in West Virginia, because it's so mountainous that it's very difficult to put cell towers in, and they use repeaters. They use the 2-meter, just drive down there anyway, listen to the Covington repeaters, get all kinds of traffic. So it isn't, you know, it's old technology that still works and is still viable and still valuable throughout the country in areas where nothing else works. And there's no infrastructure built, like in the middle of Idaho somewhere in a wheat field, you know, there's no infrastructure, ham radio is it.
Yeah, I know when I first got my license, like in the operating book or whatever, they gave some examples, and one of them was a blind ham. He and his wife, you know, were headed cross country, and you know, they sort of ended up in some little thing, bought themselves a farm like in Idaho or the middle of nowhere, North Dakota or something. And you know, even today, if you had some of those places, you know, it's very unlikely that anybody's going to want to string landline wires to your house. It's very unlikely they're going to string FiOS to your house.
If you don't live in town, you can't even get DSL in Missouri.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're more than 2 miles from the switch.
Right. Oh, right, because there's a distance limitation for DSL from the switch. So, you know, there are still people that, you know, this is really a common way for them to, you know, have contact with the outside world. Go ahead, Kevin, you had a question?
Yeah, and also I actually sent a message to my sister-in-law who got her license a couple of years ago, and these messages sort of find them wherever they're at, because they live in Arizona. She actually received the message when she was visiting her daughter in San Francisco. So I mean, it works.
There you go.
And it really tickled her funny bone.
And then the intent is to have our system working for an emergency.
Right, and like Dave said, you know, if you want the system to work in emergency, you got to keep it fueled up, keep it well oiled, you know, everything ready to go. If you just kind of leave it sit on the shelf, you know, it's not going to work. So.
But I wonder how much. When you walk into the telegraph office, you say, how much to send a message from here to San Francisco? When you send a radiogram, it's how long will it take and where do I start?
Right. I mean, a lot of the ones that I get for new hams in this area, they come from Kate in California. Usually the date I receive them is the date after she sent them.
No.
But, you know, a lot of times nowadays, digital stuff is used so they can be batched up and send, you know, like, she'll send messages, like, I don't know how many, she may say 100, and send 100 a day. And so, you know, they'll send them out digitally, they'll sort of get sorted out. You know, the ones for Maryland get split off from the ones from Pennsylvania, and then they kind of work their way back into the normal system.
You know, we're constrained by the cycles, so therefore you're going to have big gaps of no traffic being originated or sent, because you only got these opportunities, these cycle times during the day. Now, your digital modes, do they kind of operate automatically? Could you originate a message without checking into a net?
You have to send it to somebody who's sort of like a gateway into that. So like for example, I sometimes would send messages that way, and what I would do is I would send them as an email attachment in the NTS format with the little NTS routing headers and all that stuff. And then there was like a way that, you know, the actual message was sort of just like you would see if you typed it out on paper on a regular radiogram form. But I had a little routing header at the beginning that said, you know, NTS, what state it was headed for, an area code, and then there was if you had multiple ones, then there was a little thing that said, you know, here's another message going the same thing.
That would speed it up.
Right. So what I would do is I would send them to Al Nollmeyer up in Baltimore by email, and then he'd take the attachment and he would stick it into the digital system where it would go off into this digital server, and I don't know exactly how that all works. It's not WL2K. It's something different. And then people who are from the other higher level nets will like check in, and sort of like you do when you check into WinLink 2K, you know, you sort of query the server, you say, here I am, is there anything for me? What they do is they actually get a list of the messages, and they look at which ones they could take, and then they say, I'll take, you know, these messages, and then they're responsible for, you know.
It is RF being used, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it definitely is RF. Yeah. So,
Fred, is there a schedule of times and frequencies for all the nets published someplace?
yeah, there is actually, and I'll talk about that. And I have some information about the ones in this area, but also where you can get more information. So again, you know, this was sort of a traffic net. You have sort of like maybe one that goes a little long distance, like maybe a you know, a section net, and then we have our little local nets here too. Although if you read the thing, it says these guys are saying let's burn it and use the smoke because what they have isn't working. Okay, so to answer Bruce's question, so the nets that operate in the local area, basically this is the times that they operate. And so you kind of see that, well, I should have left NBTN out, but I didn't put these in any kind of chronological order, but you can see like what I mentioned earlier. It's like MAPN meets at 6. Somebody from MAPN will bring messages to the Baltimore Traffic Net at 6:30. If the Baltimore Traffic Net has messages to go out, they'll give it to the MDD rep because MDD meets at 7 o'clock, and then they'll go and check into a region net, and then it sort of goes off that way. Now it is true, sometimes, like for example, if I go to send, not so much if I do it through the Baltimore Traffic Net, although I have a hard time getting home from work in time to check into it. But with the Northern Virginia Traffic Net at 7:30, usually I can get into that. And sometimes they, don't have anybody, or the person who's going to take it to an outbound net isn't going to be able to check into that net later in the night, or there is no other net later than that because it's already 7:30, and they don't usually go much later than 8 o'clock. So they'll just say, look, I have if you need it rushed, maybe we'll have to get it some other way. Otherwise, I'll send it out, like get it whatever time the next morning when the one of the Virginia section nets meet.
MDD has a late 10 o'clock too.
Oh, they have another one at 10? Okay, yeah. So there's actually, mentioned there's these 4 cycles.
But they can't do anything at 10. There's no other region net afterwards.
Right. So they kind of hold it until the next day. Right. So so these are the nets, and I'll give a copy of this to the web to Chris if he wants to put it on the web somewhere, or we can find some place to put it.
The slow speed net is great. You can just tune in and listen to it,
Yeah, I mean, I've tried that a few times, although understanding how people check in, it's different, right? I mean, like when you check into a traffic net, you give your call sign or any other net, whereas, with the CW nets, it's kind of weird. Like I would check in with an X because that's the last character of my call sign, and then the net control operator would hear the X, and she would send the X back, and that means, okay, she wants to hear me, and then I would actually check in, with my call sign, let them know if I had any traffic, and a lot of it is done with abbreviations, Q signals, and things like that. So that's part of, learning what they teach you by these messages, how to do that, because it definitely is a lot different. You can also have, I don't know if there's any around here, but I mean, they can also have traffic nets using RTTY teletype. And they're a little bit closer to like what I would call normal radiogram, because it kind of looks like, the same format as an actual radiogram message with the header, and usually they just have like certain like strings of characters, like I think 4 ends between messages and some other stuff. But it's a little more straightforward. If you happen to be listening in to a RTTY traffic net, when you're copying it, it'll be pretty obvious that that's what they're doing. So just a little bit about, if you didn't manage to listen to a traffic net, usually there's sort of like a particular flow to it, and they're pretty much all about the same. Usually what happens is, whoever's the net control station will call the net. And basically, I'm the net control station on the NBTN on Thursday nights. So, basically you say calling the Northern Virginia Traffic Net, calling the NBTN, same thing for the Baltimore Traffic Net. I think there's probably some Q signals that they use for calling a CW net to sort of say, here we are, and we're starting. And usually the first thing they'll do is they'll ask for if there's any emergency or priority traffic, because if there is, they want to handle that right away. But on most of the normal traffic nets that we have around here, there never is. It's all routine. So then what will happen is they'll go ahead and have stations checked in. And there's different ways to do it. I mean, some nets, if this isn't a traffic net, but let's say it's a, well, I know, like when I listen to CAP nets, for example, they actually go down a roll call of all the wings in the area that they're calling, and they'll call them out, in sequence. The hospital radio net used to do that. They had, whoever the net control had a sequence, and they just went through, calling each hospital to see if they're there. RACES COMEX, the communication exercise that Maryland RACES has on the second Tuesday of every month, which is on 2 meters. For this area, it's on the Davidsonville repeater. The one for the western area is on one of the Frederick repeaters, so it's pretty easy to listen in on it. And they do it by roll call, so they'll just go down and call alphabetically, you know, all the counties within that particular area, the region. Mostly with traffic nets, though, what they'll do is the first thing they do is a lot of times they'll ask if there's an alternate net control, somebody to back them up in case something happens to your radio or signal fades in the case of an HF one. So that's usually the first thing. Then they'll ask for a liaison. So for example, on the Baltimore traffic net, the first thing they'll do is they'll say, is there a representative from MEPN? And if somebody came from MEPN, you know, they'll say, give their call sign, they'll say they're from MEPN, and either they have traffic or they don't have traffic. And then they'll say, okay, in the case of the Baltimore traffic net, is there a liaison going to MDD, because that's who's taking the messages away, and same thing, if there's somebody checks in, we'll do that. Now in the case of the Northern Virginia traffic net, they just basically say, are there any liaisons from any Virginia or section level net? So whoever's on the Virginia Sideman net or you know, 4th Region net or something like that, we'll usually check in at that time. And then they'll ask for any other nets that are not section nets. So you might get a few people from a county net or something where they have a smaller net. And then usually the next thing they do is ask for stations that have traffic. And then after they get the stations that have traffic, then they may ask, you know, portable mobile stations to check in next, and then all other stations. That's how they do it on the NBTN. The Baltimore traffic net, they just, you know, after they get the traffic listed, they just take everybody who wants to check in. So then usually the next thing is you actually go ahead and handle the business of the net. And that's basically dispersing the traffic. And that's the responsibility of the net control station to sort of, you know, as people check in, you need to keep a list of who had traffic. And then as people check in and say, you know, they're going to take traffic, you have to mark it down which one they're going to take. So like, you know, like I said, on the Baltimore traffic net, somebody may come in from MEPN and say, I have 2 for Baltimore, 1 for Laurel, 1 for DC, and 1 for Rockville. So, you know, somebody will check in and say, I'll take the 2 traffic for Baltimore. Somebody else will check in, like me, and I'll say, I'll take the 1 for Montgomery County and DC. Somebody may check in from Prince George's County, but if they don't, I'll say I'll go ahead and take that. So the net control operator has to keep track of all that. And then what they do is basically they call the station that's going to receive the traffic and tell them to call the station that's going to send them the traffic. So that's sort of a convention. It's like the receiving station calls the sending station. I think the reason for that is so that on HF, because typically on HF, like on a 2-meter repeater net, like the MBTN or the Baltimore traffic net, the traffic is actually passed right on the repeater. So the whole net occurs right there, and you know, nothing, most of the time is right there. Sometimes they may send somebody to an alternate repeater, but on HF nets, a lot of times they will send them slightly off frequency to handle the traffic. And the idea is that the receiving station needs to find a place that's clear, that doesn't have any interference, so they can hear, and then the sending station will go looking for them. And typically they'll say, like, you know, go up 5 kilohertz or go down 5 kilohertz, so they kind of know where to start looking, and then they kind of tune around until they find each other. So that's kind of the reason why the receiving station calls the receiving station calls the sending station. And then after all the stuff is handled, you know, some nets, like the Baltimore traffic net, just kind of, you know, closes. Yeah, they, you know, release people specifically. Sometimes they may release people, like all stations that didn't have any traffic, you know, you're free to go, and that's the end of that. Sometimes they'll just go down the list of stations who checked in and, you know, let them go or have them make a comment, things like that. So like, for example, you know, the net that's not a traffic net, but the Tuesday night net, we usually don't specifically release people. You know, the net's closed, everybody's free to go. And so, again, these are just some common things, and this is true even for, you know, like the public service net, like the race net, the Marine Corps Marathon net, the Tuesday night net. You know, the net control station is basically in charge, and the sergeant of arms to keep order and make sure that, you know, things get handled in the right order. So something that's priority gets handled before something that's routine. So, you know, you gotta listen and follow directions. And this is one of those things that on the Tuesday night net, for example, people, it just always drives me crazy. They'll say, okay, we want you to check in by giving only your call sign using standard ITU phonetics. Do not give any information before your call sign. Do not give any information after your call sign. And then invariably, the first person that checks in will go, this is unkey, you know, K3CSX, mobile, you know, Gaithersburg, no traffic. It's like, that wasn't what they asked you to do.
I was getting tough the other
I'm not going to one of those characters.
So, I mean, again.
Yeah, but Northern Virginia has a different style.
Right, they do. I mean, they do the same thing. They do the opposite. They want you to key up, say this is released, to hear if there's anybody else.
But that's probably some explanation of why.
It's just, you know, it's what, you know, there's, again, that's why whenever you check into a net, you got to listen and follow directions, because they're not all the same. They all operate slightly differently.
Now, in the preamble, it says training for our Tuesday night net.
Mhm.
Let me ask you this. When I'm from New Ham, I'm not confident. I get nervous. I don't have all my ITUs in a line. Should I not check in?
Actually, to be honest with you, I think probably the best thing is listen. Listen for a couple weeks. I mean, there are a lot of hams I know have gotten their licenses that have been listening, because I've heard some of these folks that get on the air, they just got their license, and I swear that they've been, if it wouldn't be for the call sign, I swear that they've been on the air for several years. And the reason is because they've had a scanner, or they've already bought the radio, they've been listening for a long time, and they basically know how, you know, the flow of things, and how people just, you know, casually get on the repeater if they just want to have a casual chat. They, you know how people check in when they're checking into a net. So it's really good to listen first. I always suggest that. The other thing too is, I'll just mention, like, so in tactical nets, like a race net, you know, there might be something a little different, because they'll assign people tactical call signs, because there might be 2 or 3 operators at a given location. Either they've all decided to take turns, so that one of them has to go for a break. There's still somebody at the station. They don't have to worry about leaving. So it also makes it easier for somebody who's listening to know what's going on based on their call sign. So, you know, they may hang like start line, finish line, race director, mile 1, mile 2, 8-3, you know, food stop 4, and that makes it pretty clear. When somebody calls, I don't have to say, WB2U, where is that person? What is he doing? So, you know, that's again something different, and you just have to be,
When do you ID, or how do you fulfill your FCC requirements for ID when using technical calls?
You just have to do it at the end of a set of transmissions. So, for example, you know, you could be food stop 4, you know, net from food stop 4, and then say net, go ahead. You know, food stop 4 needs, you know, more whatever. Net says, sorry, it's too late. You know, with the Marine Corps Marathon, you got to do with what you have. Have a nice day. And then you'll say, okay, food stop 4, WB2U, and net K3CSX. So you only have to do that, or if for some reason you actually were having a long transmission, which really shouldn't happen in a net that goes more than 10 minutes, then you got to ID. Usually the only person that has to ID might be like the net control station on, you know, the MVTN, because they've been on for more than 10 minutes. So that's basically what we're saying about the FCC rules. And the other thing is, again, this isn't so much with the traffic net, because basically with the traffic net, you're going to pass the message as written. But like with the public service nets, you know, think about what it is that you're going to say when you key up. So, for example, you know, if you're at a milepost and you want to report a runner that's down, you know, kind of think, what is it they're going to want to know? They may want to know the bib number. There's controversy as to whether they're allowed to use it, but it generally has been accepted that that could be reported. But they're going to ask you, like, at least the nature of the problem, right? Because it's like really important for the net control station to know when you're calling to report a runner down, there's a big difference between a runner who is not breathing and has no pulse versus a runner that scraped their knee or has a blister on their foot and can't go on. So, you know, anticipate that they're going to ask you that, but figure out how you're going to say that in a concise way. So, okay, so we kind of talked about, you know, messages that basically right now we're talking about, for NTS, we're talking about formal messages, and formal messages have a specific format. Most of the NTS traffic nets, that format is the ARL radiogram, although if you ever happen to listen to the COMEX or some other nets that are like that, they may use an ICS format. They might use the ICS 213, is that the right number? I can't remember. The ICS 213, which is a general message format. Not unlike this, but it doesn't have all the check stuff, but you know, has the same kind of general stuff. Who's it from? What's their title? What's the message? You know, and who's it going to? And then there's the informal ones, which we said, like the Sunday night net and like the race nets. So there's, actually I should update this because there's actually a fifth thing. There's 4 sections to an ARL radiogram. And so once you're kind of familiar with the format, you don't even need to have an official form. I mean, I pretty much just use a piece of paper all the time. And you know, or if somebody's new and will say they said, okay, I'm a new ham, I've never done this before, but I'm willing to receive a message to deliver to another ham, or maybe it's even for them if they're a new ham. You know, we'll say, okay, well, just take a piece of paper, you know, draw a line across the top, leave about 10 blank lines, draw a line across the bottom. What's above the line is the preamble. Between the lines is going to be the text of the message, and then what's at the bottom is the signature. Usually, actually, we tell them a third line for the address. So this is basically the format of a radiogram, and I'm not going to get into the details of what all the fields mean. I mean, someday if somebody really wants to know that, we'll you know, go into that. I'll tell you where you can also get some of this information as well. So basically, this first line up here is the preamble. Basically, what that's for is to identify the message, identify whether it's an emergency message, a routine message, if it requires a return receipt, if it's a birthday greeting, that it should be delivered to that person on a specific day. There may be a limit that says if you can't deliver it in 3 days, forget about it. Where the message came from, and that's important because the station that sent the message out originally, if there's a reply, it's going to probably get back to that person, right? Because in this example here, non-ham person sent the message, and she sent it through, you know, either she called this ham up on the phone or, you know, however, and this ham, who's located here in North Carolina, sent that message out. So if somebody wants to send a message back to Betty, what they're going to do is, you know, they'll address the message to Betty, their address, and then the idea is that it will get sent back probably into the area where this station checks in, and he'll be able to get the message. And you may know, for example, if they didn't know the address and phone number, he will have it because he took the message from them.
The place of origin is Betty and...
No, the place of origin is where the station is located.
No, that's not what I was told. It's the originating the message.
No, it's the location of the station of origin.
The radiogram is about the station. It's not about the person sending the message.
Yeah.
Usually
Okay,
one
I'd like to
side.
address that because
Yeah.
I've been using the methods and procedures document that.
Okay.
I'll try
look
to
at
find
that,
it
but-
and forward it to you.
Okay. And then, so basically then, you know, who the message is going to, a lot of times, you know, we don't really care as much about the address, but maybe that's really good is a phone number. So if you know the phone number of the recipient of the message, you know, that really helps a lot. Because sometimes it might be hard to find them, especially nowadays. so many people don't have landlines. All they have is cell phones, so there's no real way to look them up like you used to.
Isn't the address critical because how does it get routed to the right sections and everything?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times people won't have a street address, but at least they'll have like city and state. And so, like for example, this guy, Kate. You know, you say Kate. I don't know her last name, just her call sign, and wherever she is in California. Or actually, Kate and this Lauren up in, you know, if you just said, I have a message for N1IQI, everybody in the national traffic system knows how to get it to them. And K6HTN or whatever, Kate out in California, everybody knows her, everybody knows how to get the message to her. But if you're sending to an individual, like a birthday greeting, give as much information as you can. Because, you know, if you have the phone number, typically the way a message is delivered is the person will be called on the phone. If for some reason, you know, you can't reach the person on the phone, then, you know, maybe the ham will decide to try to send it, mail it to them. That's not really required, but, you know, they may just do that as a courtesy. So having as much information about who it's going to is important. So that's why the address and the phone number are really the important stuff about the addressing. And then there's actually the text of the message, and then the signature of who sent it. So the 4 absolute required things are the preamble, the addressee, the text, and a signature. What's at the bottom actually, I consider required too. It's basically recording information. So, you know, you keep track of if it's a message that you're getting to deliver to somebody, you know, who you got the message from and when you got it. And the reason that may be useful is, you know, let's say you got the phone number and it wasn't right. You might, if you're going to send something back, before you send it back to the originator and say, I couldn't deliver it, you might check with that station the next time you hear them on the net and say, that number didn't work, I just want to make sure that I copied it right. And then the same thing if you deliver it or if you're sending it out, like so if I'm sending a message out from the Baltimore traffic net to the representative from MAPN, I'll put down here, you know, his call sign of the guy and the date and time that I sent it off to them for my records. And of course, as is the case with any kind of message, whether it's the NTS message or you know, things going on from a public service event, you have to be very precise in what you transmit and what you copy. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, you transmit it exactly as you received it. Now, hopefully it hasn't gotten jumbled up through the system, but if you get something like from a served agency person, they may be using terminology that makes lots of sense to them, and it will make lots of sense to the person on the other end, but don't, you know, try to change it. And, you know, if you ever listen, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, can you send messages outside the country or just within the U.S.?
Actually, you can send them outside the country. If it's going to another ham, usually that is not a problem. If it's going to somebody who is not a ham, then you have to find out first if the U.S. and that country have a treaty that allows that. Because, you know, a lot of foreign countries, the telecommunications system is run by the government. And they don't want to have the idea that somebody can circumvent their telecommunications system by using amateur radio. So there has to be some sort of agreed treaty that, you know, says they can do that.
This third-party traffic.
Yeah, that's what's called third-party traffic. If it's not a ham, then it's third-party traffic. And that's true if you give, let's say your, you know, niece is visiting and she wants to talk on the radio, you can do that. That's third-party traffic, but you're the control operator, but she's a non-ham.
So in the sense of a radiogram, you can actually send a message that has no special meaning to anybody listening, only to the person receiving. Technically, it's not encrypted, although that might be a possibility in a radio frame, because you're sending it in clean.
Right. Yeah, encryption, right. There's a difference between encryption and using...
You're just repeating and sending the message. You have no idea.
Right. Somebody else can obviously... Encryption means like they wouldn't even be able to copy what you were sending.
Right. So
it would just sound like gibberish. But they can copy down exactly what you sent, and if you understand the lingo, then you understand the message. If you don't understand the lingo, then you know, you don't. But nowadays, the internet is a great place to find out. You know, when police used to use the 10 codes, you know, once the internet came around, you can Google it and find out what all the 10 codes, because they were all different from one county to another and one jurisdiction to another. So that's why we do that. And that's why, by the way, the incident command system has said, you know, plain, everything is plain English, plain text. You know, not, you know, all these like 10 codes, and we don't usually use the Q codes except in traffic nets. You know, maybe CW still uses them, but the idea is on voice we don't use them.
And we shouldn't be using Q codes in speech.
Right, that's what I said. So, you know, like, it's considered not good practice these days to say, like, I'm going to QSY to, you know, the 700 machine. You know, if you're going to go to the 700 machine, it's like, okay, I'll go see you on the 700 machine. Or meet you over there. You know, or like, if you want to just, you know, let's say you get on the repeater and you want to have a contact, you don't say QRZ, QRZ, this is K3CSX. You know, the common behavior on repeaters is you just say, this is K3CSX. The idea is you're letting people know that you're listening, and probably because you want to talk to somebody, right? Because if I don't want to talk to somebody, I'll listen, but I just won't announce that I'm there. I'll just lurk in the background. So, but again, like field day, man, CQ field day, I mean, they use abbreviations for that. If you're, you know, on Morse code, they'll use the letter CQ and FD. And they may use, like, if you didn't hear the call, you might say QRZ, you know, who's calling me, to get them to repeat. But, and they'll use QSL actually a lot to confirm contacts. But again, on 2 meters, it's just, you know, QSL, that is just not. So again, why to participate in nets? Again, you know, I think it's a good skill to have, to understand how to reliably transfer messages from one place to another. You know, the NTS is probably a much more rigid, restricted thing. I don't know, Mars probably has something that's very similar, but you know, again, they have a specific protocol and procedures that they use, and it's good to understand that. For, you know, just listen to any of the public service nets on the repeater. You know, they'll be starting up probably March, April timeframe, and even if you haven't done one before, maybe listen to one. Or for that, actually, I would suggest, if you want to get involved in that, just, you know, contact whoever is the coordinator for the event. Most of them are Bob Lyons, and say, hey, I'm interested, but you know, I'm a new ham, I've never done this before, and you know, maybe they'll pair you up with somebody, and you know, they'll coach you through like how you operate from a mile marker or whatever.
The first one is this coming Saturday.
Yeah, that was something I never heard of before either.
Yeah, something that's a mile run, marathon, I think.
Yeah, it's deferred until the 21st, actually.
What is it?
The race this weekend, the trail race, they rescheduled it until the 21st.
Oh, they rescheduled it until the 21st, okay.
Oh, okay.
The park asked to reschedule because
Oh, okay. And again, you know, trekking into a traffic net, you have a better understanding of net operations. If you listen, you kind of get the idea of what a net control station does. There's really nothing wrong with, you know, check into a net. Even if you don't check into the net, just listen to a net. Just copy down all the call signs of everybody who checks in. Notice, you know, who's been checked out, you know, keep track of that so you can sort of do this. You know, if you actually do start participating in the net, be the alternate net control, because usually what happens is at the end of the net, you'll compare notes, make sure you had the same number of people checked in, the same number of pieces of traffic got handled, listed, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good learning experience. And again, you know, somebody said like, well, it's a good way to like get much better at your ITU phonetics. There's a place for them. There's a time not to use them. And if you listen to traffic nets, you kind of understand like you don't use, you know, ITU phonetics for every word that you're transmitting. You know, it's the ones that you get to know after a while which ones are the confusing ones, which are going to require that versus which, you know, words are straightforward and just say them. And again, if you are doing it where you're delivering a message around the holidays, you do get to interact with people who aren't hams, and you can explain something about the hobby to them. And the other thing is, if you're the kind of person that likes things, recognition stuff, you can, if you participate in a traffic net on a regular basis, you can apply to become a official relay station, and then you can get this nifty little badge from the badge guy, with the ARL stuff on it. You get a certificate. If you, some nets, like I used to be the net manager of the Baltimore traffic net, but problems, so I reliably couldn't get into it, so somebody else actually that guy, Marty, is now the net manager. But I used to make a certificate, so for the people who checked into the net on a regular basis, we usually had a meeting at the Timonium Hamfest every year, and so, those people who checked in regularly, I give them, their certificate of appreciation, and mail them to the ones who didn't.
Fred.
Yes.
As long as you mentioned it, no, it's in case some of you have been under a rock this in the winter. No more Timonium Hamfest.
Yes, I just saw that on the Maryland MDC or one of the reflectors.
Yeah, Glenn sent it out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What's his call, son?
N3COB.
Yeah.
I see it.
3COB.
That's COB.
Okay, so these are some of the myths, like if you say like why you don't participate in the traffic net, so the big thing is a lot of people think, oh, if you don't have a general class license, you can't participate in the traffic net. You can participate in the traffic net to the extent that, you're allowed to transmit, and like in the local area, a lot of them are on 2 meters, so anybody who's got a license nowadays can do it. I'm not sure if does the Maryland Slow Net meet in the novice portion of the band by any chance? Okay.
They 3.5.
Okay, so you would have to be a general for that. Okay. There was a period of time that they had the quote Tech Plus, that if you previously had passed the 5 word a minute, you were allowed to use what used to be the novice portion of the 10 meter band and some of these other things, but I guess they gave up on that. So, that's not a good reason why you can't participate. The other one is like, well, I don't have an HF set up. Well, I don't actually have an HF set up. I live in a townhouse. I haven't really figured out how to get a good antenna. Although, Vic gave me some good ideas, and other people have given me good ideas about attic antennas and things like that. But you don't need it because, in this area, most people should be able to check into the Northern Virginia traffic net. Maybe not with your HT, but if you have an HT connected to a J-pole or any kind of a Yagi gain antenna, you should be able to do that.
And don't forget the Maryland phone net also has a link to the Echolink.
Ah, yes, I've done that before. Yeah, so somebody from they check in on the is it John Creel's,
yeah,
the Wash DC. Yeah. So what happens is when the Maryland Emergency Phone Net meets, one of the people who is on the radio net will be a liaison to Echolink, and they'll check into this conference server. And so I've done this before. I'd be out in the woods walking my dog, and I'd use the Echolink app on my phone, and I'd be able to check into it. I forgot all about that. That's a good point. Let's see. Oh, and the other thing is, well, I can't because I don't have any experience. Well, unlike jobs that say we can't hire you until you get experience, and how do I get the experience? This is how you get experience. You don't need the experience. NVTN, I mean, we've been on there and we've taken I don't know, 5-10 minutes sometimes to just send one radiogram, if that's what it takes to explain the whole process of how to send it. That's what we'll do.
Right. Anybody that's really interested and wants to actually list a lot of these, there's one other, the West Virginia Panhandle net.
Oh, yeah, that's on 2 meters also?
Yeah, that's on 2 meters, and on my side of the county at least, I have absolutely zero issue even getting with an HT.
What repeater is that? I don't even know.
Well, it's been so long. I've been without my radio equipment for almost 6 months now, so
okay.
After all.
Well, anyway, so I'll show you at the end where you can find that kind of stuff out. The other thing is I have to be an official relay station in order to handle traffic. No, handling traffic is how you become an official relay station. And you do not have to belong to the ARL, even though the ARL sort of is the sponsor of the whole national traffic system and they have information, anybody can participate in that. Just like you don't have to be an ARL member to participate, in ARES and other things that the ARL sponsors. Okay, so here's where you can get some information about some local nets. these are the ones that I kind of mentioned earlier. The one thing about the Baltimore traffic net, actually, and I did want to show you this, is if you go to the Baltimore traffic net on their, if you go back to their home screen, there's a thing on here that says ARL NTS message format. So if I can get my cursor on it. Where is my cursor? Here it is. So if you go here, you see this, there's an image of a radiogram. And what you can do is you can click on the different fields. So for example, if you click on number, it takes you and explains what the number means and how that number was assigned, and things like the precedence, how that is filled in the different meanings. And place of origin, you are right. You are absolutely right. I was wrong. That's right. And that's the reason why you need to do that, because if you want to send a reply back to that person, you need to know where that person is located, not the ham that sent it.
And when we list the traffic, we're listing that city.
Right, because that's where it gets delivered.
It may not get to the ham.
Right.
But if it's a handling instruction, it has to go to the ham.
Right, if it for replies, right?
I mean,
yeah.
Reply.
So
but there's something wrong with the message or something.
Right. So anyway, you know.
Fred?
Yeah.
Just while we're on it, what are the cases where they might be one and the same? Because I was confused like you were.
Well, most of the time it is, because when I originate messages, I put Germantown. I'm the originator of the message. It's me, it's my message.
Right.
But if somebody in my neighborhood or in Gaithersburg calls me up to send a
right, you should be listed as
Gaithersburg. But I put Gaithersburg.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yep. So anyway, this may be useful if you want to get a sense for what the different fields mean. So Baltimore Traffic Net, baltimoretraffic.net, and then you can click on the thing. Some of the other places, each of the nets around here has a website. Like I said, the NBTN has one.
How about the section net website? Is that the, oh, there it is right there, MPD is, I think, has that graph that you showed earlier about the times, the boxes.
Yeah, that's on the ARL-MDCnet website. The MDD net has information on that, but some of the other nets have their web pages off somewhere else, right. Usually hosted by the net manager. I don't know why they didn't. The section should have hosted them all, but that's how it worked out. And so this was the other thing, Bruce was saying, like, well, how do I find, or I want to find out the Eastern Panhandle Traffic Net, what frequency and what time. You can go to the ARL site, look up in the net directory, tell them, what you're looking for, and they'll give you a list of the nets, what time and what frequency they are, and what mode they operate on. If you want to learn more about the National Traffic System, there's this huge document the ARL put out called the Public Service Communications Manual. And the whole second section of that manual deals with the National Traffic System, and the first chapter of that specifically is about the National Traffic System just in general.
I ran across, it's called the Methods and Procedures.
Right,
and
MPG.
If anybody's interested, I found a reformatted version of it that I like. It's a Word document, and it looks nice and everything. It's much easier for you to read, unless I can find it. If you're interested in it, I can send it to you.
Yeah.
Maybe to you.
And actually,
it's an opus.
It's a huge, the method and procedure guide, because there's a whole section that just talks about how to handle and transmit messages by voice. There's a whole section about when you're doing it by CW. I think there's a section about the digital stuff with the headers.
Yeah.
As
of 2008, I think they added that.
Yeah, so, and actually, it was developed by, I guess, a group of hams put this thing together, but Al Nollmeyer, W3YBQ, who lives in Baltimore, he's actually the section traffic manager in our section, but he's been sort of in this stuff for a long time, and he was, one of the key people that was part of putting that document together. And there is a section on the ARL website for forms, so they have the ARL radiogram form is there if you want to get one and print a couple out. Just if you listen to a net and you hear somebody taking a piece of traffic, you know, go ahead and copy it down on that, you know, figure out if the check was right. You know, that other thing on the Baltimore site will tell you how you figure out what the check digit is. And, you know, there's other forms out there too, like some of them are just like operating cheat sheets, quick kind of things, a list of the Q codes, and, you know, stuff like that. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. So, I think we sort of...
Is NTS involved in SET?
No. Well, I'm saying put it this way. So NTS, it actually sort of, yeah, it could be involved in SET, and it actually very typically is involved with field day. Because field day, you get bonus points for sending NTS messages, right? You get 100 points for sending one to the section manager. You get 100 points for every 10 messages you send to other people. You know, you get 10 points for every other message. So for example, when we have field day, I'll send one to the traffic manager, or to the section manager, Jim Cross. Usually then I'll also send one for to the section traffic manager. I might send one to like Marty, who's the Baltimore traffic net, net manager. Send one via, out to, that goes via WL2K, comes out in email to like, the people that we work with in the Office of Emergency Management. And maybe, some people there, a lot of times I'll have forms and it'll just, solicit other people if they want to send them. So basically we get our extra 10 messages sent, and then we get 100 bonus points. So that's my thing with field day. See, it's like,
200 points total, right?
Well, 100 points for the one specifically to the manager, and then for 10 more you get another 100 points. Okay. So what I like is I can spend 20 minutes worth of time, get the club 200 points. I mean, that's like 200 voice contacts or 50 CW contacts. That's a lot of calling CQ. So I like going for the low-hanging fruit, high-value points. I haven't remembered though lately during a set that we've actually sent messages to the national traffic system. But I know, for example, that on field day weekend, some of the nets, like the Baltimore Traffic Net and the METN, will meet additional times, because if everybody shows up with like 25 messages at 7:30, they'll be there till, ungodly hours. So a lot of times they'll have one, 10 a.m., 1 p.m., 3 p.m., 5 p.m., the regular one is 7:30, maybe a late one at like 9 or 10 o'clock. And the same thing's true with some of the other ones. So,
if I get a traffic message, say from New York, and it's to you, and I know I'm going to bump into you on the air maybe, can I deliver the message following the proper procedure, but say on our repeater?
Sure. So,
instead of calling you up, I can give it to you.
Right.
Copy, my number.
Well, okay. So there's two things you can do. If you want to send it to me over the air as an NTS message, and I'll copy it as an NTS message, that's fine. Actually, if you're trying to get like in the public service honor roll, you get credit for messages originated, messages sent, messages received, messages delivered. So you get credit for a message delivered, I get credit for a message received. So, but not delivered, because it only counts if you're delivering it to a person who's not a ham. So yeah, you could do it that way, or the other way, you could just say, I have a radiogram message for so-and-so, and just tell me what it says. That would be up to you how to do it. And so when I get a lot of messages for new hams, I usually just read the message to them, and because they're new hams, they don't yet know about the format. The format's not going to mean anything. Yeah, right. So that's usually how you deliver it. But if it's somebody that knows the traffic system, yeah, they can say, okay, I'll copy it.
But I could use the repeater to do it.
Oh yeah, sure.
Simplex,
right.
I don't have to use a telephone.
Right.
I'm finding
or in person, I think I got one the day before a meeting, and I just brought it in to the person at the meeting or something like that. The other thing too, I just mentioned this, is that NTS messages, there's some shorthand that they use, right? Because you basically want to keep the whole thing to 25 words or less. And so there's a lot of short things. So like birthday greetings, there's like a short form. ARL has a list of standard, they call them numbered messages. They're like standard messages that have blank lines in it is a fill in the blank. So, you know, there's one that says something about, you know, congratulations on your blank. So you could just say ARL 43 anniversary or ARL 43 50th birthday. So I didn't have to like send as much, and they can get the message across in a shorter thing. If you happen to be delivering one of those though, you got to be sure that you undecode it first, so that, you know, the person especially, yeah, you're not saying ARL 43 your birthday, and that okay, that doesn't mean anything. Right. So that's the other part of that. So anyway, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to view our video. You can find out more about the Montgomery Amateur Radio Club by visiting our website at www.marcclub.org. Well, bye for now.